No one's on, but that's okay. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started this week. Sorry, we had some technical problems with the Hangout this week, so getting a little bit of a late start, and you probably all are trying to get on the other link right now. Oh well, what you gonna do? So at least you can watch a recorded episode of this if you actually choose to do so. But that's all right, because I'll give you some other cool resources to help you learn the content on this one. Unlike I have promised to do in past sessions and have it done, I'll be going through and updating those ones as well. So far we've learned a little bit about how the economy works kind of on an individual level, how economic decisions, people's subjective values, how people communicate their subjective values through the price system, how the interplay of supply and demand help to coordinate people's desires and people's interests, people's values, based on what people are willing to give up in order to get what they want, okay, which we are going to call our opportunity cost. And all these things so far are happening on a very small scale, you know, one person to another person, small communities kind of thing. And today I want to take a shift a little bit and take a look at economic systems on a large scale, how entire societies organize their economy. Whether it's intentional or not, they absolutely do. Entire societies do have an economic system that dominates their society. And so I want to talk with you guys about a few major ones today. Now, there are really what I'm going to call 5 main economic models. Doesn't mean that they're the only economic models or that they're the only systems that can be employed within those economies or the only strategies that can be employed within economic models. But there's 5 main ones that I'm going to discover with you guys or discuss with you guys today. And what's kind of interesting is while everything that we've been talking to up to this point with a market economic system, particularly a free market economic system, something that we're going to call capitalism, those laws don't necessarily change when you try to force alternative economic systems into place. And so we can see how, even though people try to change the nature of their society based on how they organize their economy, it doesn't necessarily change the laws of economics. They're not applying a new set of economic rules. All they're doing is they're applying a new set of man's laws to try to change people's incentives. And we'll talk about that in just a second, okay? So the first thing that I want to talk to you guys about is the idea that there's really 2 main categories of economic systems here. And the first one is what we call a market economy or a free market economy. And in a market economy, that's where we allow people, individuals to act, to pursue their own values, to pursue their own ends through their own means. And that by allowing them to do so, the interchange between people, the transactions, the bartering, the creation of a money device, all of those things make it so all those things coordinate using the price system in a market economy. On the other hand, you have what is called a command economy, or sometimes it's referred to as a centrally planned economy. And in a command economy, you often have one person or a small body of individuals who have been granted the power, supposedly by society at large, but that's usually not the case. But you have one person or one group of people that get to make economic decisions for the people at large, for everyone that is a member of that society. Okay, and within that kind of command economy, you see several different factions, several different strategies, several different applications of well, what needs to be planned, what needs to be controlled, what doesn't need to be planned and controlled. Where can we allow people to have a little bit of economic freedom, and where can they, where do they not need to have economic freedom? Okay, but this whole thing is based on really the idea that there are 7 general economic objectives. And these are not necessarily objectives that you and I are always thinking about, or that even there's a group of people sitting in some office somewhere saying, hey, these are the objectives we need to focus on. No, it's just these are the things that people might have in concerns about in relation to how their economy functions. And I want to lay those 7 things out for you real quick. The first is economic freedom. And economic freedom essentially is the idea that people are free to own capital resources, that people are free to benefit from the fruits of their own labors, and that it's theirs, and they're able to use their capital resources, they're able to use their labor in any way that they see fit, so long as it doesn't cause harm or damage to other people. And that is what their economic freedom is. Okay. Another one is economic security. Economic security is the idea that people can take risks with their money or with their capital resources, and that in taking those risks, there's minimal risk of failure. There's some. So if you, for example, you think you're a really good singer, but you have a decent job, and you've got, you're married, you got 2 kids, you got a mortgage, you got a couple car payments to make. To be a singer, that's a capital resource. That's my human capital that I have, that I've developed. Can I take the risk and quit my job and try to be a singer for a living? Well, what happens if the market doesn't value you as a singer to the point where you're actually able to earn a sufficient amount of money by singing? Well, then there would be some kind of safety net there to catch you in terms of some kind of welfare program or food stamp program, something like that. So that would be economic security. Another element that you've got to take into consideration, or another one of the 7 primary objectives. So you've got economic freedom, economic security. Another one is economic stability. Okay, and economic stability has to do with the business cycle, with fluctuations in prices, with fluctuations in other ways that we measure the economy, gross domestic product, employment, net growth, all these other ways that we're going to measure the economy, that they're not happening on this kind of crazy cycle, but that they're slow and steady. Okay. And so that's one of the things that where the objective of the Federal Reserve is, rather than looking at crazy economic, they're to have slow and steady inflation at 2 to 3% every year annually. Okay. Now, have they done that? Sure, which has caused like 98% inflation over the last 100 years. Actually, more than that, but we'll talk about that more in a couple weeks. But that's the idea behind economic stability, that prices aren't going to fluctuate very often, that the economic boom and bust cycle is going to be kept to a minimum. And I know we haven't talked about boom and bust of the business cycle. That's coming up next week. Okay, so economic freedom, economic security, economic stability. Economic growth is another one. If growth is a big priority to you, then you might take positions as a society that encourage entrepreneurs, that encourage businesses to expand and to hire new people and to explore new products and to experiment and try new things. Well, that growth can be sometimes very risky and can often run contrary to your objectives if you're looking at economic stability. Sometimes when you're trying to grow very quickly, or at least give people the economic freedom to try to grow, well, that can cause these really quick spikes and really sharp drops in the health and the strength of the economy. Okay, so at least even within those four goals, you've got some that are running contrary to each other. Okay, now we've also got economic or full economic employment. Full economic employment. This one is really, really tricky because a lot of people are going to use this to describe different things. A lot of people think that employment is only about employing human labor. And so the goal is to try to make it so that in any given economic situation, 95% of the people who want to be working have jobs, are able to work, are able to earn enough money to feed their families, to survive, to do what they'd like to do. Well, why not 100%? What about the other 5%? Well, the idea maybe those people are just in between jobs. It's a kind of unemployment we call frictional unemployment, or natural unemployment. And so we're not shooting for 100%, but 95%. But the question here is, if you're so focused on employment of human capital, of human labor, then often we forget that we've got other capital resources that can be employed as well. And those other capital resources are often more efficient or more effective at doing whatever it is we want to get done. This is the whole, well, are robots taking all of our jobs kind of thing. And the answer is both yes and that's a good thing. Okay. What I want you guys to understand is that capital, in terms of robotics, technology, things like that, they are merely tools. And while they can sometimes be used by some people to replace certain tasks that have been traditionally performed by human labor, it doesn't mean that they are a replacement for human labor altogether. What they do, however, is that capital, or this kind of technology, robotics, computers, what they do is they enable us to do more stuff with less human labor. They allow us they help our labor be more productive. Okay. So I also teach a computers class with some of my other students. And one of the things that I often share with them is the idea that back, not even all that long ago, but when someone was writing a doctoral dissertation, imagine this. Okay, you guys have written, 3, 5, maybe even a 10-page essay before, a 10-page research paper, that kind of thing. Imagine that you had to write a research paper that was a book. And I don't mean like a short book, 15-page. No, I mean you're writing a research paper that is 300, 400, 500 pages in length. Okay. And as you're writing this research paper, you have to type it out over and over and over again. Anytime you misspell a word, anytime you make a mistake, oh, you know what? After proofreading this, I realized that I needed to add a new paragraph in the middle of page 87. But since I have to add a new paragraph in the middle of page 87, that's going to change my page numberings for every other page after that. So every page after page 87, I have to retype all those from scratch because you're doing it with an old typewriter. Well, you guys probably have never had to deal with that. You might have had to deal with handwriting a rough draft for a report and then typing it on a computer, which, by the way, is a total waste of your time. Type it out the first time, okay? Because you have this capital resource, you have this computer, you have this technology, this robot that helps you get more done with less time. You're not wasting all that time. It's not so redundant, okay? So before anyone tries to convince you that human capital is being replaced by uh, other capital resources, or that the jobs are being taken by robots, okay, it's not true. The nature of jobs is changing, sure. Manufacturing jobs, are there as many manufacturing jobs here as there used to be? No. Why not? Because we've been able to train robots to do those jobs. So where are the jobs now? Well, gee, I don't know. Maybe they're in robotics. Maybe they're in computer engineering and robot. What's the term? The people who design the robots, not the people who do the programming, but the people who do the actual architectural, structural engineering design. Robotic engineering, that's what I'm thinking of. Okay. So it changes the nature of the jobs, but it doesn't necessarily replace jobs altogether. So when we talk about full economic employment, when some people use it as just a means of looking at human labor, that's kind of a misconception, okay? So quick story, and I know we're kind of getting sidetracked a little bit, but this is great because it ties in perfect with our economic systems lesson. So long time ago, this was back probably, I want to say, in the 60s or 70s, Milton Friedman was visiting in China, and they had brought Milton Friedman over to look at the successes of their communist economic model, which was really socialist, but they were calling it communism. And as they're doing this, as they're taking Milton Friedman on this tour of China, they show him where they're building this massive canal to connect two rivers together, to connect the Yangtze and some other river in China together. And it's a massive canal. I mean, we're talking several miles long, and they're out there digging it with hands, or not with hand tools. They're digging in the dirt with shovels. This canal that's going to be close to, half a mile wide and several miles long, and they're digging the whole thing with shovels and buckets and wheelbarrows. And Milton Friedman looks at this and he goes, "What on earth are you guys doing? How incredibly inefficient is that? Look at all the economic resources you're wasting here." And the premier of China, who's there with Milton Friedman, responds and saying, "Yes, but look at all the jobs we're creating." And in the creation of all these jobs, we're showing people that their labor has value and their labor creates value. And Milton Friedman then kind of points out their folly, and he says, "Well, then why are you giving them shovels? If this is a jobs program, why don't you make them dig it by hand? You could employ 10 times as many people." And so people have this idea that there's this opposition between human resources, human capital, and other kinds of real capital. And the truth of the matter is that capital and labor don't go, they're not opposing forces, okay? Capital and labor work side by side, they work hand in hand, right? Cars don't replace people who are going to carry me on their back. Cars make it easier for me to do my job. Technology makes it easier for us to be more productive and more efficient at our jobs, okay? So economic freedom, economic security, economic stability, economic growth, economic employment. Another one here, economic equity. Equity. That word sounds an awful lot like equality. And it's partly because it kind of has a very similar meaning. Okay. So economic equity is sometimes called economic justice, or what some people are going to call social justice. The idea that different people should have access to the same opportunities that everyone else has. And you say, well, yeah, that's kind of the American dream. Well, yeah, but it's not necessarily the case in the United States, right? There are definitely some economic discrepancies. Say, well, yeah, but we're all treated equal before. No, 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 you're not treated equal before the law. Okay. Do you really think that, well, you guys are all sitting in class right now, but do you think that other kids who are going to school in some inner city neighborhood really have access to the same kinds of educational resources that you do? Probably not. So do they even have access to the same education you do? No. Okay. So there's all kinds of things here that we can look into. However, that's looking at the equal opportunity side of the puzzle. Some people take that to the extreme and they say, economic or equal opportunity is not sufficient to determine economic justice. Economic justice requires that there be equal outcomes. Equal outcomes means that there's no rich, there's no poor, everyone has the same amount of money, everyone has the same money, everyone has the same amount of stuff, the same quality of stuff, the same kind of stuff, the same stuff. You go, hold on a second. People are different. People have different wants, different desires, different needs, different goals and values. Why on earth would we want everyone to be the same? I don't know, but guess what? Some people do. Some people actually want that. And so they use that to help them drive how they think that the economy of an entire society should function. Okay. So I'm leaving one out here, and I'm trying equity, economic freedom, economic growth, economic stability, economic security. Hold on. Freedom, growth, stability, security, equity, full economic employment. And I know I'm leaving out a really important one, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. So let me look it up real quick. Watching me dig through my computer. That's all right. I ain't gonna kill you for a second. Oh, what am I doing? I know exactly what it is. Economic efficiency. Economic efficiency simply means maximizing the number of outputs per unit of input. Well, hold on. Let's jump back to that Milton Friedman story. If they're creating full economic employment by making everyone dig in the trenches with their hands, then are they maximizing economic efficiency? Does that seem like a very efficient system? No. So again, we have these different objectives and these different ideas clashing. Economic freedom and economic equity. Yeah, those two don't go together very well. The more you let people be free, there's gonna be discrepancies between what some people have and what other people have. That's just the nature of the game. Uh-oh. Okay, cool. That's how things are going to happen. Why? Because not only do people put forth different amounts of effort, but people simply want different things. Some people want to live a very high speed, high stress life, working uh, 20 hours a day in a very, very high intensity job. And they're going to probably earn quite a bit of money doing that. Some people would prefer the quiet life in the countryside where they're doing a lot of manual labor, uh, doing a lot of build it yourself kind of activities. And well, it's not very efficient. And so they're not going to be very profitable doing those kind of things most of the time. But when we take a look at these different economic objectives that people within society have, um, we see that the individual objectives don't align very well. That some people who want to maximize freedom are going to run into problems with people who want to maximize equity and economic justice. We see that people who want to maximize economic stability are going to run into problems with people that want to maximize economic growth, because those two things don't coincide. They don't work well together. So depending on how society kind of organizes itself, the way that a group of people decide how they're going to coordinate their efforts. Sometimes we do this through the use of a government. Sometimes we do this through a market system. Simply, people buy what they want and people don't buy what they don't want. Okay. So, when as societies and different people work within societies to try and get these goals in alignment, what they'll do ultimately is they'll adopt one of these dominant economic systems. Usually, like I said, we're looking at market economies or command economies. And what I want to do right now is I want to show you guys a little chart that has different types of economic systems on it. And we'll talk our way through this real quickly. So I'm going to put this up on the screen share. And I'm hoping that this enables me to write on the screen and that you guys are able to see it. Let me see if it actually works. And I'm not seeing anything on here, but let me go back here. And let me look at the settings. Okay, well, I might be able to just do this. No, that's not what I want either. Okay, sorry guys. All right. Well, let's switch back here. And let's see what we can do. Okay, that's right. We can at least take a look at this screen and go from there. All right. So now what you can see here is you can see 5 different dominant economic systems. And these 5 different economic systems are kind of separated into 3 different groups here. And the first group up at the top is our market economies. And if you look at a purely market economy, one where people are always free to trade, you have maximum economic freedom, The result in that will be maximum economic growth. It will also be a big change in economic security. It will be huge discrepancies in economic equity. Okay, but capitalism as a market economy, as a truly free market economy, is based on a couple key concepts. And what you're looking at here is you can see how the different economic systems, oh, there we go. Okay, are based on the characteristics of who owns the factors of production, who controls the factors of production, and how do we choose to distribute what has been produced, or the factors of production themselves. So here you're looking at in a capitalistic economic model, or what we call capitalism. Who owns property? Well, private individuals are allowed to own property on their own. Families then are allowed to own property in common. They can share with one another based on the actions of the private individuals. What about corporations? What about businesses? Can they own property? Well, of course they can, because it's nothing more than a contract between one, two, three, or more private individuals. So in a capitalist economic system, ownership ultimately is given to individuals to own property. And I don't just mean to own the fruits of their labors, but to actually own natural resources as well. And who gets to decide how those resources are used? Well, again, it's the private individuals who do own those resources. And then how do we distribute those resources? The price system. We buy, sell, we trade. Well, but what about gifts? People give gifts all the time. Absolutely they do. But any gift that's given freely is still part of someone exercising their own economic freedom. Okay, so within a capitalist economic model, this is the dominant economic freedom. All right. Well, what if some people say, well, yeah, that capitalism, yeah, that's all fine and dandy for some people, but you know what? Man, is it wasteful. I mean, I go to the store and there's like 27 different kinds of breakfast cereal. There's 4 different brands of milk, for crying out. Why on earth do we need 4 different brands of milk? And so this is where you start getting into what we call our planned economies, or what we will otherwise call our command economies: fascism, socialism, and communism. And in a fascist economic system, efficiency takes first priority over everything else. So efficiency takes precedence over your own freedom. So if you're one of the dairy farmers who owns one of these 4 different brands for producing and selling milk, then what's going to happen is you're going to get shut down, or you might get shut down, because people will look at this system and say, 4 different brands of milk? We don't need 4 different brands of milk. We only need 1 brand of milk. The other people who are currently producing milk need to divert those resources to the production of cheese, yogurt, or maybe instead of doing dairy altogether, maybe they need to be producing beef cattle instead. And so they actually will use the force of government to shut some businesses down, to pick winners who are allowed to maintain their business, so that individuals might still be able to exercise ownership over their resources, but not entirely, because it's only with permission from the government that they're able to do that. So if they have to have permission to own certain resources, you better believe they have to have permission from the government to use those resources in certain ways. Now, here, this is the tricky thing, is within fascism, we still have the price system. People still go to the store and they still buy goods and services. But does it actually reflect what the market really wants? No, the market might very well want 4 different brands of milk, or at least they want more milk on the shelves. They want more milk to be available, no matter if it's produced by 1 brand or 4 brands. But they want to have some diversity, they want to have some competition, and they want prices to reflect that. And so in a fascist economic model, the price system doesn't work the way that it's supposed to. Remember, prices are the language that markets speak, and markets are simply human interaction. So when we don't allow the prices to function the way that they're supposed to, the communication signal isn't there. Okay. Now you take fascism, and we've had fascism in full effect in the world before. Italy, pre and during World War II, under Mussolini, was a fascist economic model. Okay. Now let's look at socialism as an economic model, because this is one that gets people a little confused. Actually, it's communism that gets them confused, because in our day and age, we like to use the term socialism and communism interchangeably, and they're not. Okay, we like to look at the government over in China and say, oh, it's the Chinese communists. Well, guess what? They're not communists. At least their economic system is not a communistic economic system. The Communist Party of China is the dominant political party, but the economic system they employ is not a communist economic system. Same thing in Cuba right now. We say, oh, they're the communists down there. Well, yeah, the Communist political party is in charge, but they don't have a communist economic model, and I'll explain that in just a second. So let's look at socialism. Socialism, and you will hear people talking about this a lot lately, is the idea that it's all about economic security. Well, what happens if someone loses their job? What happens if someone can't afford their health care? What happens if someone gets really sick and no one's able to help them? What happens to the poor people who can't afford an education? And so these concerns for the economic security of the population ultimately creates new branches of the government, where the government has to own all of the factors of production. The government must control the healthcare system, because it's not fair that some people are able to get maximum health care and some people aren't able to afford any health care. It's not fair that are able to afford a very good education and some people aren't able to afford any education whatsoever. Therefore, the state must control all education. So they own the factors of production and they control factors of production. Well, then how do they decide what stuff to produce, how to produce, who to produce it for? How do they know? How does the calculation, the economic calculation work? Well, they hire what they call experts. Okay, they'll put together these planning boards and these central planning agencies, and these central planning agencies will tell the people, you produce this, you produce this, you produce this. And they will try to create incentives for them to produce those things. However, under the Soviet Union, that was a truly socialist economic system, there were a lot of problems where people, if you went to the Soviet Union, people didn't necessarily care. The people in the factories didn't care about customer satisfaction. They didn't care if both your right shoe and your left shoe were symmetrical, or if they were even the same size, or if they were even the same color. They didn't care about those things at all. Why? Because they didn't have to compete with other businesses. You didn't have any choice as a consumer, so you were stuck buying their goods. So because you were stuck buying their goods, then there was no incentive for them to produce better quality goods. There's a story from a professor. I want to say that she's out of University of Wisconsin, but it might be Michigan. But she talks about participating in a study abroad program in Moscow, and how she had a lamp on her desk that probably weighed about 50 pounds, that she was not able to move this desk lamp by herself. And so the question is, well, why was she not able to move this desk lamp by herself? Why was it so heavy? Well, because the factory that was producing desk lamps was not being told to produce quality desk lamps. They weren't being told to produce a lot of desk lamps. They had been incentivized to produce a certain gross weight of desk lamps. So all they did was make the lamps really, really heavy by filling the base of the lamp entirely with lead. And because they were able to do that, they consumed a whole bunch of lead, which is not really a very good thing to have in household appliances like lamps, especially electrified household appliances like lamps. They used it. They consumed that scarce resource. They met their quota. They met their criteria, but customer satisfaction was not very high at all. Okay, so socialism, not only does it distort the price system, it creates a system of perverse incentives. There used to be a joke. There's a comic in the Soviet Union, and it's two men in a factory standing underneath a giant nail. I mean, it's a 1-ton nail. It's gigantic. And the one man says to another, "Well, that doesn't look very useful, does it?" And the other gentleman says, "Who cares? At least we met our quota." The idea being that the incentive to actually produce nails that people wanted wasn't there. The incentive was to meet whatever the objectives were put before them by the rationing board, by their politically connected friends, and as long as they met those, they were able to collect their paycheck. Okay. So socialism isn't a very effective economics model. Now, I want to delve a little bit into communism because we don't have a whole lot of time left, and I definitely want to hit communism and mixed economies before we have to wrap up here. Communism is the idea that the ultimate economic objective should be equity, that all people should have all things in common. And you've probably heard, especially if you study, if you study a lot of early religious Christian organizations, and I'm talking like first century Christianity, and even if you read in other parts of scriptures, it talks about them having all things in common. And you think, oh, well, that's definitely a communistic economic model right here, right? That's essentially what economic equity means. Well, it may be. I'm not so sure. I happen to take a different stance on it. But what I do know is that communism actually isn't a very good economic model either. And I can explain to you why. So in a communist economic model, it's not that people aren't allowed to own private property, or that the government owns all the property, as you've probably been taught. No, that's just an extreme form of socialism. In a communist economic model, there are no property rights whatsoever. Property cannot be owned. Your house is not your house. The mere fact that you claim to own your house is a violation of the right of every other person that is part of the commune for them to exercise ownership rights over your house. Therefore, anytime you claim to own something, you're actually violating the rights of other people from the communist perspective. So, communism, you can't own anything. Well, so then how do you ever build anything? How do you decide what resources society wants to produce? I mean, if I don't get to, why am I going to make myself a shirt if it's not even my shirt? If I don't even get to keep my shirt? Well, I don't know. That's incredibly difficult because the only way under a pure communistic model that you can do this is through unanimous collective decision. What does this sound like? This is like democracy taken to the extreme, where not only does everyone have to vote, but everyone has to vote and agree. I mean, try getting 3 friends together and going out to lunch one day and try and get them all to decide to go out to the same place for lunch. Man, that's hard. But now try and get them to all decide what color shirt everyone in the entire country should wear, or how many of each color of shirt everyone should have, or what size shoes should be produced. Who should the shoes be produced for? And imagine trying to do this with the unanimous collective decision of every man, woman, and child in the society. And how do we decide who gets what? Well, you guessed it, unanimous collective decision making. Man, that is a horrible way to try to organize society's wants and needs. And I don't mean like it's bad in the sense that it's immoral or unethical. I mean, it's really, really inefficient. So you're hungry. There's an apple on a tree. You're just walking in the forest and there is an apple on a tree. Well, before you can exercise any privilege of owning and therefore eating that apple, you would actually have to go around and get the permission of every other person in your commune or in your country. If you were an entire communistic nation, you'd have to get the permission of every single person before you could eat that apple. Okay, and so communism is incredibly inefficient. You would die of starvation. So this inefficiency is ridiculous, and it can be catastrophic. When we say that 70 million people were killed when Mao Zedong in China tried to implement a communist economic system, which was really kind of a communist socialist hybrid, but never mind that. Killed 70 million people. Okay, and that's not a joke. It's not funny. It's a catastrophe. And fascism and socialism and communism have been the means by which governments in the 20th century have killed over 100 million people. I mean, that's a travesty. And most of the time they've done it simply as a means of trying to make their economic system look better than it actually is. It's easy to have full employment, Mr. Socialist, if all you do is you take all the unemployed people or the people who you think are not worthy or unable to be employed, and you just kill them off. Yeah, I'm sorry. Now that's an unethical system. Okay, and the last one that I want to cover with you guys are what we call mixed economic models. And just about every single country on the planet, every single society, every single social organization has what we call a mixed economic model. Even here in the United States, do we have absolute capitalism? No, nowhere close to it. Here in the United States, we have a capitalist, fascist hybrid with elements of socialism in a society. Okay, so explain to me how that works. Well, uh, what kind of fascist elements do we have? Well, let's take a look. Okay, who is able to own goods? Private individuals with the permission of. You have to pay the state some kind of duty or tariff or fee in order to continue owning your property. Well, yeah, that's what property taxes are. You guys know that your parents have to pay property taxes, and if they don't pay property taxes, then the city can actually come and take your house. Yeah, and it's all because you have to continue paying them for the privilege to continue owning property that you already purchased from someone else. I'm sorry, but that is fascism, plain and simple. Okay, and that is a common practice here in the United States. Do we have socialist elements within our economy? Well, yeah, sure. I mean, the Affordable Care Act, what some people refer to as Obamacare, just effectively socialized. No, sorry, that's still more of a fascist model. But the health insurance industry, that's kind of a fascist approach. But when you look at some things like education, for the most part in the United States, education is run using the socialist model. You have state-operated, state-run schools where, well, what kind of stuff do you think they teach? Well, they teach the stuff that the government wants you to learn. Do you think they teach you the stuff the government doesn't want you to learn? Well, only if you have some crazy teachers who are willing to put their jobs on the line to make sure that you guys learn the truth. Do we have elements of communism in our society? Yeah, kind of. Kind of. A lot of times this comes in the form of like our small friends, family kind of thing, where you have this mutually agreed what's mine is yours, what's yours is mine. And again, that's in some families, not in others. Okay. But the fact of the matter is that the United States is not a capitalist economy. The United States is a mixed economic system where there's a lot of private ownership, and for the most part, businesses are free to do business as they please, unless the government says otherwise. For example, I've got a small shave ice vending business that I've got to get 5 different kinds of licenses or permits. I'm not able to operate on places where the city won't allow me to operate, even though that property is also privately owned. Yeah, that's not private individuals being able to use their property the way they see fit. No. I'm sorry. That's fascism. Okay. So while we are a mostly capitalistic economic system, we have massive elements of fascism in our economy. We have many elements of socialism in our economy as well. And what this boils down to is now, how do we justify having so much government involvement in our economy? Why? What is it good for? What does it do? And does it actually do the things that we intend for it to do? All right, guys, I'm going to leave you with that. We'll wrap up for today. There'll be some short little readings that I promise I will post to them. In fact, I'm going to post some stuff for the past few weeks as well. And we'll go ahead and we'll stop there. All righty? And take it easy, guys.